at this point, good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be here at PDF. I'm an alumni, so thank you very much. And part of my involvement has been precisely because of attending these conferences. So I'm originally from Puerto Rico, where I grew up. And Puerto Rico, as most of you may know, was hit by what is classified officially as a Category 4 storm on September 20th, 2017. And please bear in mind the category, as this, I'll come back to this point at the end of these slides. The result of the hurricane was that left the island entirely dark. There was absolutely no cell towers, no power, and no way to get in or out of the island. And I didn't hear back from my family for nearly 2 weeks, and it was truly hell. And I wanted to do something. I reached out to other tech brigades, but we realized that we all had in common the same problem. There was no data coming out of Puerto Rico. So with over 95% of cell towers out of service, we can truly conclude that Puerto Rico went entirely offline. So how do you coordinate? This presented additional logistical challenges in terms of how do you get resources down to the island. So I knew that a few nonprofits and I knew additional people were getting bottled waters and canned foods down there, but how do you get them to the island when it's entirely offline? And more often, if you're able to get those supplies to the island, how can you deploy them to the communities that need it the most? So I kept watching as other entities tried to deploy experimental technologies. The problem was that no one was explaining to the people that these were experimental technologies. So you had an issue of quality of service where people expected these technologies to work as they normally would, which created a lot of frustration. So I came up with this crowdfunding campaign and did a little bit of research, and after a while found this Garmin device, and basically this was the setup that I came up with to make it self-sustaining, solar-powered, so that people can just send a text message, which was really, coming back to my initial point, just a text message would have been suffice on those first weeks to get to know a little bit more about my family and how they were. After I had the setup, I went down on October 24th, 34 days after Hurricane Maria made landfall. And I had no idea what to expect down there. But this is what I found. A lot of cables still on the ground, with over 83% of cell towers still unavailable in Barranquitas. It was entirely full disconnected. Roads had been washed away along with roads. But here's another interesting fact that I found out when I went down to Barranquitas, which were these tarps. These tarps had been set up by FEMA to address the citizens' claims. There's only one problem with this approach. You just saw a slide where the roads and the houses had been washed away, so people couldn't get to these places. And more of these places were connected by vehicles like this one, which was, as they dubbed it, an oasis provider. So I sat down there, basically with a rogue team of friends. I myself as an electrical engineer, Javier, a computer engineer, Ruth, a computer science, and Pablo, a land surveyor. And we teamed up with a local parish of volunteers, you'll see that in the middle, that they were already delivering foods and supplies to the sick, elderly, and people in bed rest. We managed to connect over half the town of Barranquitas by deploying a very simple, straight, out-of-the-shelf product where we would have the volunteers running around with technologies, which I happen to have on me right now, and we would have them just deployed and covering the whole area, getting supplies back, getting information back to a centralized point, and then relaying that via satellite. So additional nonprofits, we teamed up with additional nonprofits, and the photos speak for themselves in terms of how people felt empowered. This is pretty much how the map looked like at the end of our journey. But a few challenges to think about as I'm wrapping up here. First off is relying on frail infrastructure. The infrastructure was already frail before getting down there. There was a lot of government bureaucracy, and within all the experimentation, a lot of what was going on, they forgot about the people. So a few opportunities here to think about. First of all, keep it simple. These were off-the-shelf products, pretty much. Training was at minimum. Network with your peers. If it had not been by conferences like this one and by the good relationships that I had with people still on the ground, this would not have been possible. And focus on empowering the communities, which is where the actual people live at, and they know their communities very well. And I'll leave you with these final slides of how Puerto Rico looks like last week, pretty much. So there is no denying that Puerto Rico is still not ready at all to face another storm. And recall the category that I mentioned at the beginning. So this was what was left of the weather radar that they're still rebuilding. And it was designed to withstand a Category 4 storm. So clearly, maybe that Category 4 is still somewhat debatable. And I recognized that my project was basically to fill a void of what would have been expected of the official disaster response should have been. When it comes down to it, we're talking about human lives. Staying alive, it's not about experimentation. It's about thinking clearly and keeping it simple. It's about empowering communities and using our networks. So let's keep it simple and let's make good. Thanks.